Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I own a decent-sized tow company that handles most of the police contracts in our area. I've been doing this for about 8 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything until last night happened. I got into the towing business when my dad passed away and left me his small operation. What started as 2 trucks and a dream has grown into a fleet of 12 vehicles serving 3 counties. We handle everything from simple breakdowns to major accident recoveries. The police contracts are our bread and butter because they provide steady work, even if it means getting called out at ungodly hours. Last night was one of those nights. When 12:30 a.m. hit, my phone rang with a dispatch for a rollover accident about 20 miles from my office. Single car, nobody hurt thankfully, but the vehicle was completely totaled and blocking traffic. I grabbed my flatbed truck and headed out into the cold night. The recovery took about an hour and a half because the car had rolled down a small embankment and I had to winch it up carefully to avoid causing more damage. When I had the mangled sedan secured on my flatbed, it was almost 2 a.m. and I was exhausted. All I wanted was to get back to the yard, drop off the wreck, and go home to bed. The drive back started normally enough on the 2-lane highway with its 55-mile-per-hour speed limit. Then I caught up to a car going barely 40 miles per hour. I figured maybe they were just being cautious because of the late hour, but when following for about 5 minutes, I noticed something concerning. The car kept drifting toward the shoulder, then overcorrecting and weaving toward the yellow center line. From my elevated position in the truck cab, I could see directly into their rear window. That's when I spotted the driver tilting a bottle to their lips. I immediately grabbed my phone and called the non-emergency dispatch line. I told them I was the owner of the towing company and explained that I was following what appeared to be an impaired driver on Highway 49. I described how they were weaving all over the road and that I could see them drinking from a bottle. The dispatcher asked me to describe the vehicle and give my location. I told her it was a blue sedan that looked like a Honda Civic with a license plate that started with XYZ and that we were about 5 miles south of the intersection with County Road 12. Heading north. She said she was sending an officer to intercept and asked me to stay back and keep watching the vehicle until units arrived. Within 10 minutes, I saw red and blue lights in my rearview mirror. I hit my amber warning lights and started slowing down to let the officer pass. There wasn't much shoulder on this stretch of road, so I was trying to give him room to get around me. That's when things went sideways fast. The car in front of me must have finally noticed the police lights because they slammed on their brakes without warning. I had to lock up my air brakes and came within inches of rear-ending them with a totaled car still strapped to my flatbed. The screeching sound of my tires was deafening. The officer had already moved into the opposite lane to pass us, so when everything suddenly slowed to a crawl, he found himself ahead of the traffic stop. He positioned his cruiser at a 45-degree angle across the roadway and stopped the sedan completely. I parked my truck behind the scene with my warning lights flashing, angled to protect everyone from oncoming traffic. We were now blocking half the highway. But safety comes first in situations like this. I climbed down from my cab and walked up the shoulder toward the police car to see if the officer needed any assistance. The driver's door of the sedan flew open and out stepped a woman in her 40s, clearly intoxicated and absolutely furious. She started screaming at the top of her lungs, calling me a perverted freak and demanding to know why I was following her. She yelled that she was calling the police, which was ironic since they were already there. She continued her tirade, claiming that I was some kind of creep who had been stalking her since she left the pub and that I'd been following her for miles. She demanded that the officer arrest me for being a pervert. The irony wasn't lost on me that she was demanding the officer arrest me while she was clearly drunk and had just been pulled over for driving under the influence. The officer on scene was the same one I'd worked with for over an hour at the rollover accident. He told her that what she was claiming was impossible because I had been working an accident scene with him for the past hour and a half, so there was no way I could have been at any pub. I explained to the officer that I had called this situation in because I witnessed her drinking while driving and swerving all over the road. Karen didn't like that explanation one bit. She started screaming even louder. She called it all nonsense and said that all cops were the same. She told the officer that she paid his salary and that he needed to do his damn job. She called him her servant and said he worked for her. The officer's expression hardened while she continued berating him. I've seen a lot of drunk people over the years, but this woman took entitled behavior to a whole new level. A second patrol car arrived and parked behind my truck with lights flashing. I stepped back to direct the light traffic that was starting to back up, but I could still hear every word of Karen's increasingly hostile rant. She demanded to speak to the officer's supervisor and claimed that he couldn't treat taxpayers like this. She bragged that she knew the mayor personally and threatened him with problems for his behavior. The officer began administering field sobriety tests, which she failed spectacularly. She couldn't walk a straight line, couldn't touch her nose with her eyes closed, and nearly fell over trying to stand on one foot. When the breathalyzer came out, she blew a 0.12, well over the legal limit. The moment the handcuffs appeared, Karen transformed into some kind of escape artist. She started slipping and sliding out of both officers' grasp like she'd been coated in cooking oil. It was simultaneously the most ridiculous and concerning thing I'd ever witnessed. She screamed that they couldn't arrest her and that this was police brutality. She claimed she was being kidnapped and continued thrashing around trying to escape. For nearly 5 minutes, I watched these two trained officers struggle to subdue one intoxicated woman who seemed to have suddenly developed superhuman flexibility. She was twisting, turning, and somehow slipping out of their grip repeatedly. Finally, they managed to wrestle her to the ground and get the cuffs secured. When they were loading her into the patrol car, the first officer approached me. He asked if I wanted to impound her car too, saying we might as well make it a complete package. I told him absolutely. Within 2 minutes, I had her sedan loaded onto my wheel lift attachment. When we were finishing up the paperwork, Karen was still screaming from the back of the police car about lawsuits and police brutality. I finally made it home around 4 a.m. and collapsed into bed, figuring that would be the end of my interaction with our entitled drunk driver. My dispatcher called me around 2 p.m. today, waking me from much-needed sleep. She told me that the woman from last night was at the office demanding her car back and that she wasn't happy about the impound fees. I asked if she had explained the 12-hour mandatory hold for driving under the influence arrests. My dispatcher said she had, but that Karen was claiming we were trying to scam her and wanted to speak to the owner. I could hear Karen's voice in the background, still just as belligerent as she'd been on the highway. She was yelling that this was theft and that she was calling her lawyer. She accused us of running a scam operation. When I arrived at the office, Karen was pacing in the waiting area like a caged animal. The moment she saw me, she pointed at me and screamed that I was the pervert who had been stalking her and that she was pressing charges. I explained that I was the owner of the company and that her vehicle was impounded following her arrest for driving under the influence. I told her there was a mandatory 12-hour hold before we could release it. She claimed that was impossible and insisted she wasn't drunk. She said this was all a setup and accused me of probably paying the cops to frame her. My dispatcher showed her the paperwork, explained the fees, and outlined the policy. Karen's response was to demand we call the police department to straighten this mess out. When the officer confirmed everything over the phone, Karen's entitled attitude reached new heights. She said fine, but declared that she wasn't paying these ridiculous fees because it was extortion. I explained that the fees were set by county ordinance and that we didn't set the rates. She said she didn't care because she was a taxpayer and this was theft. She demanded that I get my business license revoked. When another 30 minutes of threats and demands to speak to managers who didn't exist, Karen finally paid the impound fees and towing charges. The total came to over $400, which seemed to physically pain her to hand over. When she was leaving with her car, she turned back one last time. She told me that this wasn't over and that she was calling the Better Business Bureau and the news stations. She said I would be sorry I messed with her. I just smiled and waved while she drove away, probably still over the legal limit knowing her. So this happened about 2 years ago when my wife and I were expecting twins. We've been living in this tiny one-bedroom studio apartment on the second floor, and the only way to get in was through these rickety metal fire escape stairs. Not exactly ideal when you're about to have two babies, right? We managed to find this perfect house that was privately leased, it had been completely renovated, had plenty of space, and even came with a big backyard. The owner was this nice, older gentleman who handed us the keys and wished us luck before driving off. That's when she appeared. This woman from next door walked over the second the owner's car disappeared. She looked me up and down like I was some kind of criminal. She immediately started laying down the law about how her boyfriend worked night shifts and needed to sleep during the day. No noise before noon, she demanded. No loud music ever. No parties. No construction work in the mornings. She made it crystal clear that I better understand these rules. Then she told me that the parking spot behind our house belonged to them, even though it was clearly public space. She'd been using it for years, and I shouldn't even think about parking there. I was too tired to argue, so I just agreed and said we'd try to keep it down. She seemed satisfied with my compliance and walked back to her house. The irony hit us that very first weekend. These people who demanded complete silence started throwing massive parties every Thursday through Sunday. And I'm not talking about quiet dinner parties. I'm talking full-blown ragers with music so loud it shook our windows. They had this illegal radio setup where they'd broadcast terrible music all night long. The parties would go until 5 or 6 in the morning with constant yelling, drunk people stumbling around, and music that sounded like torture. Our other neighbors were amazing though. They welcomed us warmly and warned us about Karen and her boyfriend. One elderly neighbor pulled me aside and explained that nobody on the street could stand them. He told me the boyfriend was a complete bully who picked fights with everyone. They ran an illegal radio station from their house and partied constantly. All the neighbors had tried complaining over the years, but nothing worked. Great. Just what we needed with twins on the way. A few weeks later, my father-in-law came over to help lay new grass in our backyard. He parked his trailer in the public space behind our house, loaded with heavy grass sods. We'd barely started working when Karen's boyfriend came storming over. He demanded that I move the trailer immediately because that was his parking spot. I explained that it was public space and we were just unloading grass, telling him we'd be done in a few hours. He didn't care what we were doing and insisted I move it right then or he'd move it himself. I told him we weren't moving heavy grass sods all the way around the house just because he thought he owned public property. I suggested he find somewhere else to park for a few hours. He got this ugly look on his face and started yelling about how he'd been using that spot for years and we had no right. I'd had enough of these people already, so I told him to go screw himself and went back to work. Later that evening, when my father-in-law was hooking up his trailer to leave, the boyfriend came out again. He threatened my father-in-law, warning him that this better not happen again or he'd regret it. That's when I lost it. Nobody threatens my family. I ran outside and got right in his face. I told him to back off immediately and warned him that if he ever threatened my family again, he'd be the one who regretted it. He must have seen something in my eyes because he backed down and went inside. But the damage was done. My wife had been watching from the window and was crying when I came back in. She was scared he might hurt her father or me, and with all the pregnancy hormones, she was a wreck. I apologized and promised her I wouldn't escalate things anymore. But inside, I was planning something. A few weeks later, my wife went into labor. It wasn't easy. She had to have a cesarean section because one of our daughters almost got strangled by the umbilical cord. We were in the hospital for 3 nights, barely sleeping, stressed out of our minds. When we finally came home, our family had put up this beautiful welcome sign for the babies in our front yard. It had been there for days, so our neighbors definitely knew we were coming home with newborns. Did they care? Not one bit. From our very first night home, they cranked up their illegal radio station and threw parties every single day. Not just weekends anymore, every day from noon until 5 or 6 in the morning. My wife was recovering from surgery, I was working on no sleep, and our daughters were crying constantly because of the noise. One of them had terrible colic, and the loud music made everything worse. After 2 weeks of this torture, I'd had enough. I started researching illegal radio broadcasting laws. Turns out what they were doing wasn't just annoying, it was seriously illegal. Their massive antenna was unlawful. Broadcasting without a license could get you jail time, and the fines could be anywhere from 10,000 to 45,000 euros. They could seize all his equipment and arrest him. I didn't report him right away though. I was worried about retaliation while I was at work. My wife was home alone with the babies. So first, I started looking for a new house. We called the police once during this time hoping they'd help with the noise complaints. Big mistake. The officers went straight to their door and announced they were there because of our noise complaint. They basically threw us under the bus, told them to keep it down, and left without even checking back with us. The next day, the boyfriend was screaming over our fence, warning me never to call the cops on him again. He threatened that I'd regret it if I did. I reported the threat to police, but they said, without witnesses, there was nothing they could do. A few days later, I was leaving for work when he stepped out of his car. He told me he needed me to cut back the ivy growing through their fence because it was getting tangled in his antenna. He mentioned he'd be gone for a few hours, so I could come into his yard and trim the stuff on their side. This was perfect. I acted polite and helpful, telling him I'd take care of it right away. While I was trimming the ivy, I got a close look at his entire setup. I took note of the antenna's make and model, saw what kind of cables he was using, and even got photos of all his broadcasting equipment through his window. This was exactly the evidence I needed. By then, we'd found a new house and signed the lease. We'd be out in 2 weeks. I researched the proper channels for reporting illegal radio broadcasting and found out I needed to contact both the telecommunications agency and the police. I wasn't thrilled about dealing with the police again after their last performance, but luckily my nephew works for them. He connected me with officers I could trust not to expose us as the complainants. I gave both agencies all my evidence, photos, antenna specifications, frequencies he was using, everything. They explained they'd start a neighborhood investigation to make it look like they'd discovered him through routine enforcement rather than a specific tip. This was crucial for our safety. I asked them to wait 2 more days after we moved before taking action, just to be safe. We moved out 2 weeks later, and 2 days after that, they raided the house at 6 in the morning. My former neighbor called me with a play-by-play. He excitedly told me they were seizing everything: computers, radios, phones, even his car. The boyfriend was being led away in handcuffs while his girlfriend screamed and tried to interfere, so they arrested her too. It gets better. This wasn't his first offense, it was his third. His car wasn't insured and had failed its safety inspection. Normally that wouldn't be a big deal, but they'd been watching him for a week and had footage of him driving illegally. He was fined 30,000 euros, sentenced to 12 weeks in jail, and all his equipment was destroyed. His girlfriend got 40 hours of community service. They had to sell the house to pay the fines. Our former neighbors were thrilled. The entire street celebrated getting rid of them. About a year later, I ran into them at the grocery store. They gave me looks that could kill. If stares were deadly, I'd have been a pile of ash right there in the cereal aisle. But that's all they could do. They knew exactly who was responsible for their downfall, but they couldn't prove it. I'm usually a pretty peaceful guy, but when you mess with my family, especially when my wife just had surgery and we have newborn babies at home, I don't play fair. They pushed and pushed until they found out just how dirty I could fight. My grandmother raised me after my parents split when I was 8. She was a tough woman who had lived through the Great Depression and 2 bad marriages. Every week when she took me to the bank to deposit my allowance, she would tell me to always keep something for myself that nobody else knows about. She said men can change, and when they do, you need to be able to leave. She had watched too many of her friends get trapped in bad situations because they had no money of their own. My mother learned this lesson the hard way when she discovered my father was cheating. She had to sneak out in the middle of the night with just me and a small bag. The only reason we survived was because my grandmother had secretly given my mother money over the years to put in what she called a Grammy's secret fund. When I turned 18, I opened my own secret account. Every month for 22 years, I put money aside. Not much at first, maybe $50 when I was working part-time jobs. But when my career took off and I started making good money, I increased the amount. My husband never knew about it. My husband and I have been married for 15 years. He's a good man, and we've built a nice life together. We have joint accounts for bills and savings, we both contribute to retirement funds, and we've never had serious money problems. I make more than he does, but it's never been an issue between us. My best friend has been in my life since we were 6 years old. She's like a sister to me, and I love her kids like they were my own. 6 years ago, she married a guy who seemed perfect. He was charming, successful, and great with her children from her first marriage. But gradually, things changed. It started small. He would make comments about her appearance or criticize how she handled the kids. Then he started controlling the money, insisting that all their accounts be in his name only since he made more. He became racist, making horrible comments about her mixed-race children. The emotional abuse got worse, and he started neglecting the kids completely. Last month, she finally decided to leave him. She discovered he had drained all their accounts and frozen her out completely. She had been contributing to those accounts for years, but since only his name was on them, she had no access to her own money. She couldn't afford rent for a new place or a lawyer for the divorce. She called me crying, and for the first time in our 34-year friendship, she asked for help. She told me it was huge to ask, but she had nowhere else to turn. He had taken everything, and she needed to get the kids out of there. I didn't hesitate. I transferred $15,000 to her account that same day. I told her not to think about paying me back and to just focus on getting her and the kids safe. She said I was a lifesaver and that she had this kind of money just sitting around. I explained that my grandmother always said to keep something for emergencies, and this definitely counted. Everything was fine until my husband started asking questions about how she could suddenly afford a lawyer and a new apartment. He thought she was broke and wanted to know how she was paying for all this. I told him I helped her out. When he asked how, I explained that I actually did have $15,000 available because I've been saving money in a separate account for years. The color drained from his face, and then he exploded. He demanded to know what I meant by a separate account, saying we share everything and asking how I could hide money from him for our entire marriage. I tried to explain it wasn't hiding, just something my grandmother taught me to do for emergencies. He asked if I meant emergencies against him, if I'd been planning to leave him this whole time. I said of course not, but he cut me off. He said I'd been lying to him for 15 years and asked if I had any idea how many times he'd stressed about money. He wondered how many opportunities he might have taken if he knew we had that kind of backup. I pointed out we'd never struggled financially and he'd never needed to know about it. He got even angrier, saying that wasn't my decision to make. He reminded me we're supposed to be partners and asked how I could make a $15,000 decision without talking to him. I said she was my best friend and she was in danger. He replied that he wasn't saying I shouldn't help her, but that I should have discussed it with my husband first. The fight went on for hours. He kept coming back to the betrayal of the secret account and the fact that I had made such a big financial decision without consulting him. I tried to explain about my grandmother's advice and why women need to protect themselves, but he wasn't hearing it. Things got worse when he called his family. His mother and sister both called me selfish and deceitful. His brother said I was probably planning to divorce him and take half of everything while keeping my secret stash. He said no wonder I made more money than my husband, claiming I'd been planning this for years. His sister was worse, saying you can't trust women who keep secrets like that and asking what else I was hiding. The family pressure got to him and he started questioning everything about our marriage. He moved into the guest room and barely spoke to me for weeks. Then my best friend called with an update. She told me I'd never believe what happened in court that day. When I asked if it was good news, she explained that the judge ordered her husband to pay her legal fees and give her half of everything in those accounts he thought he could hide. It turned out he was hiding money too, way more than what she had contributed. Her lawyer said she'd probably get around $40,000. I told her that was amazing news. She said the first thing she was doing was paying me back, with interest, because I had saved her life. When I told my husband about this, something shifted in his expression. He asked if she was paying me back, and I said she wanted to, but I told her she didn't have to. He asked me to wait, wondering if her husband was hiding money too. I said he was hiding a lot more than she ever contributed to those accounts. He asked if she would have never known if she hadn't left, and I said exactly. I added that if I hadn't been able to help her, she might still be trapped there. He got quiet for a long time. Then he started asking more questions about my grandmother's friends and what happened to women who didn't have escape funds. I told him about my mother's experience and how many women end up with nothing when marriages go bad. The turning point came when his own sister called, upset about her husband's gambling problem that she had just discovered. She told him she found out her husband had been hiding debts from her. She said she might need to leave, but she didn't have any money saved. My husband looked at me when he hung up the phone. He asked how much was in my account now, and I said, after helping my friend, still quite a bit. He told me he owed me an apology because he never thought about it from that perspective. I said I should have told him about the account years ago because I could see how it felt like a betrayal. He agreed that maybe we both learned something. A few weeks later, we had a family dinner where his mother made a snide comment about my secret fund. My best friend was there with her kids, and she had something to say. She told his mother that the secret fund had saved her children from watching their mother get abused every day. She suggested that instead of criticizing me for having it, maybe his mother should be asking why women need them in the first place. His mother said she never needed one. My best friend replied that neither did she, until she did. She explained that when that day came, I was there for her because my grandmother was smart enough to prepare me for the reality that some men change. The room went silent. My husband reached over and squeezed my hand. He apologized for his family giving me a hard time about this and said what I did was right. His mother hasn't brought it up since. And now my husband asks me every month how much I'm putting in the fund. Not because he wants to control it, but because he wants to make sure I'm taking care of myself. The secret fund stays secret from everyone except him now, and that feels right. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.